Wealth of Nations Unveiled, generated by Storywave.ai.
Chapter 1. The Mill's Sigh. In the heart of 18th century Scotland, amidst the rolling glens and towering crags, there lay a village where the dawn chorus was not of birds but of machinery. Here the mills of Dunedin throbbed with the ceaseless rhythm of progress, or so the philosophers in the high streets of Edinburgh claimed. But within these grey stone walls, where the air was thick with lint and the clamour of looms, Ian McAllister stood as a testament to the human cost of this burgeoning industrial epoch. Ian's hands moved with the practiced grace of a man who has known no other dance than the twist and pull of cotton threads. His sandy brown hair was perennially dusted with the fine white fibers that floated like ephemeral snowflakes in the sunbeams sneaking through the mill windows. His sturdy build belied the wariness that seeped into his bones, and his blue eyes, once bright as the summer sky, now mirrored the dull cast of polished steel. "Aye, they sing of wealth and nations," Ian murmured, his voice a rough burr that cut through the monotony of the mill's drone. "But what of the wealth of a man's soul?" Around him, the other laborers toiled, each lost in their private reverie or despair. Ian's idle moments were few, but when they came, he was seen fiddling with a small gear, a relic from a machine that had once threatened to take his leg and had left him with a limp. Yet he wore his scars as badges, and his limp became a rhythm that countered the mill's relentless tempo. In the close quarters by the looms, a lass named Elspeth caught his eye and gave him a knowing nod. Her hands flew across her work, a blur of efficiency born from years of repetition. "Will ye ever cease that constant dreaming, Ian?" she asked, her voice barely rising above the din. Ian offered her a wry grin. "Dreaming's the only thing they cannae tax or take from us, Elspeth." Elspeth shook her head, her own locks a fiery cascade that seemed to defy the smothering grays of their surroundings. "Well, keep your dreams quiet, lest they take those too." The millmaster, a gaunt figure named Mr. Craddock, paced the aisles with hawkish vigilance. His beady eyes missed nothing, and he was quick to remind the workers that dreams served no purpose under his roof. "Eyes on your work," he barked, his voice as sharp as the shears that hung from his belt. Ian returned his attention to the loom, his mind a whirl of thoughts. He had heard whispers of Adam Smith's vision, where the market would be unshackled, and each man would have the liberty to craft his own destiny. But liberty felt like a cruel jest within these walls, where the only markets were those of human sweat and toil. As the day waned, the mill's sigh seemed to grow heavier, as if even the machines were weary of this relentless pursuit. When the bell finally tolled the end of the workday, Ian joined the exodus of workers spilling out into the twilight. The cool air was a balm to his lungs, and for a brief moment, he let himself believe in the possibility of change. Beside him, a young lad named Davy limped along, the newest victim of the mill's insatiable hunger for flesh and bone. "Will it always be like this, Ian?" Davy's voice was tinged with a mix of fear and resignation. Ian placed a hand on the lad's shoulder, feeling the tremble beneath the coarse fabric of his shirt. "Not if I have aught to do with it, Davy. The world's changing, and we'll change with it, or my name isn't Ian McAllister." As the mill's silhouette faded into the encroaching darkness, Ian's limp became less pronounced, his steps more assured. The undercurrent of his determination ran as deep as the ancient rivers that carved the Scottish landscape. In the mill's sigh, the dreams of progress whispered through the clatter of the looms, and an underdog named Ian McAllister began to sense the stirrings of an economic revolution, one that might just begin with the heartbeat of the common man. Chapter 2. The Invisible Chains. The morning mist clung to the emerald sprawl of the Cray estate, where the grandeur of wealth sprawled like a king upon his throne. At the heart of this dominion stood a manor, its stones as cold and unyielding as the heart of the lord who resided within. Lord Alastair Cray surveyed his holdings from a balcony, his silhouette sharp against the rising sun. Within the opulent study, where the scent of leather-bound tomes mingled with the faint hint of pipe tobacco, Cray convened with his stewards. "The mills must run," he pronounced, his voice as chilling as the draughts that wandered through the halls of his ancient home. "But my lord," ventured Mr. Barrow, a man whose loyalty was as much to coin as to Cray, "the workers are weary. and talk of Smith's free market ideals spreads. Cray's laugh was a sound devoid of humor. Let them speak of markets. As long as the threads weave and the machines clatter, their notions of freedom are but idle chatter. In the village below, Ian exchanged words with the stalwart figure of Hamish, a fellow mill worker whose arms were as thick as the trunks of the beech trees lining the path to the mill. "He sees us as gears, Hamish." "Nothing more," Ian said, his tone laced with a growing resolve. Hamish spat into the dirt, a gesture of contempt for their shared plight. "Aye, and gears will be till we're ground to naught but dust." Their conversation was cut short as the mill siren beckoned them to another day of labor. The mill's interior was an expanse of ceaseless motion, where humanity was reduced to mere cogs in an unrelenting engine. The air was thick with the heady mix of oil and sweat, a testament to the unflagging toil of those bound to the looms. As Lord Cray's carriage rolled past the mill, the disparity between the elite and the laboring class was as stark as the contrast between the lushness of his gardens and the gray desolation of the village. The workers paused to watch the carriage, its polished black lacquer gleaming like a raven's wing in the sun, a stark reminder of the chasm between them. Ian caught the eye of a young worker, Lachlan, whose fingers were still nimble and quick, unmarred by the scars that came with time. "You think he knows our names?" Lachlan asked, his brow furrowed with youthful naivety. "He knows our worth to the last farthing, but not our names," Ian replied, his words carrying the weight of experience. In the great hall of the Cray residence, Lord Alastair entertained guests from far and wide, regaling them with tales of industrial might. "The market is a beast that must be tamed, and I am its master," he boasted, toasting to his own cunning. A guest, Lady Isabel, viewed the splendor through sharp eyes that missed no detail. "And what of the workers, Lord Cray? Do they not deserve a share of this beast's spoils?" Cray's countenance darkened. "They earn their keep, my lady. If they desire more, let them toil harder." As evening fell and the workers trudged home beneath a sky painted in hues of exhaustion, the invisible chains of their servitude grew heavier with each step. Ian's mind reeled with the day's injustices, the disparity between the opulence of the Cray estate and the squalor of the workers' quarters fueling a fire within him. At the threshold of his humble abode, Ian's sister, Mary, greeted him with a smile that belied the hardship etched into her features. "Will ye join us for supper?" she asked, her hands calloused from her own day's labor. Ian nodded, a smile breaking through the grime on his face. "I wouldn't miss it, Mary." As they gathered around a meager table, the bonds of family and shared struggle knit them closer than the finest threads produced in Cray's mill. For in the heart of the underdog, there was a strength that no chain, visible or invisible, could ever truly bind. And as Ian looked upon his kin, the resolve to challenge the status quo and seek a new dawn for the working man grew ever more resolute. Chapter 3. Speaking of wealth, evening draped the village in hues of amber and shadow, the day's toil giving way to the clandestine embrace of night. The air, tinged with the faint bite of peat smoke from chimneys, carried the murmurs of a gathering that convened in the clandestine corners of a dimly lit tavern. Here, the ferment of ideas matched the potency of the ale, as Ian found himself at the threshold of a world hitherto unknown to him. Ian's cobalt gaze scanned the room, lit by the flickering dance of candlelight that cast elongated shadows upon the rough-hewn walls. The tavern, known to locals as the Thirsty Thistle, was a haven for laborers, a place where the weight of the day could be momentarily lifted by the camaraderie of spirits and speech. At the back, nestled amid the barrels and burlap sacks, a circle of men gathered, their voices a low thrum of excitement. Ian edged closer, guided by a curiosity that refused to be shackled. Among them was Hamish, his robust form hunched over a tome that seemed out of place against the grain of his calloused hands. "What's this, then?" Ian inquired, nodding toward the book that lay open, its pages a stark white against the darkened wood of the table. Hamish looked up, his visage a mask of earnest intrigue. "It's Smith's Wealth of Nations. A rare bit of wisdom, this. Talks of markets free from the king's grip, they say." Ian furrowed his brow, his mind grappling with the concept. Free markets? But how does a man compete with the likes of Cray? A wiry man, known to the group as Finlay, chimed in, the fervor in his voice undiminished by the clay pipe perched precariously between his lips. "It's no about bestin' the likes of Cray. It's about a fair chance for us all, Ian. An economy that serves not just the gilded few." The conversation ebbed and flowed, a symphony of new ideas that beckoned Ian with the allure of the forbidden. As the group dissected Smith's vision, the concepts of supply and demand, of invisible forces guiding the markets, Ian felt the foundations of his understanding shift. "You think it possible?" Ian mused, skepticism and hope warring within him. For a man to rise from the loom to the ledger? Mary's brother caught a sidelong glance from a man with the sharp features and sharper intellect known to many as Douglas. "Knowledge is the first step, Ian. Ye must arm yourself with ideas before ye can challenge the fetters that bind us." The men nodded, their faces a mosaic of conviction and doubt, a reflection of the very struggles that churned within Ian's breast. His lack of formal learning, once a source of shame, now became fuel for a burning need to know more, to understand the mechanisms that could drive a man to prosperity or penury. As the hours waned and the tavern emptied, Ian's head buzzed not with drink but with the intoxicating brew of potential. Hamish clapped him on the back, his gesture one of solidarity. "We're no alone in this, Ian. We're all searching for the same light at the end of the tunnel." Ian stepped out into the cool night, the stars overhead a tapestry of possibilities. The dogged pursuit of knowledge, once the privilege of the few, now beckoned to him, a challenge he could not ignore. And as he made his way through the slumbering streets of his village, Ian felt the stirrings of a revolution, not just of industry, but of the human spirit. The journey of an underdog, armed with nothing but the yearning for a better tomorrow, had begun in earnest. With each step, Ian's resolve solidified, the invisible chains of his birth and station tugging less fiercely. He was speaking of wealth now, not of coin, but of the mind and soul, and it was a language he was determined to master. Chapter 4. The Dawn of Disturbance. Ian stood amidst the clatter and clamor of the mill, the air thick with the musk of oil and wool. His heart pounded a staccato rhythm, almost in sync with the relentless beat of the looms. Today, he carried not only his lunch wrapped in brown paper, but also a newfound fervor wrapped within his chest. He approached his workstation, where Elspeth, her fiery hair subdued beneath a drab bonnet, maneuvered her shuttle with the grace of a seasoned maestro. "Mornin', Ian," she greeted, eyes not leaving her task. "You look like a man on a mission this day." Ian leaned close, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Elspeth, have you ever pondered what lies beyond these stone walls for us? What if we're meant for more than servitude under Cray's yoke?" She paused, the loom momentarily stilled. "Speak plain, Ian. What stirred ye?" With a glance to ensure Mr. Craddock's absence, Ian shared the essence of Smith's wisdom, his words painting a vista of freedom and fair play that seemed as distant as the shores of the New World. "Imagine a place where our toil earns us more than mere pittance, where we're not tethered to the whims of lords and masters." Elspeth's gaze held a mix of skepticism and a flicker of hope. "Sounds like a dreamer's fancy, but dreams are a luxury we canna afford." Ian's resolve did not falter. "It's not about dreams, it's about what's just and right. We're not chattel to be bartered." Nearby, Lachlan overheard, his hands momentarily halting their dance through the loom's teeth. "What are ye two nattering about, then? Sounds like dangerous talk." Ian turned to him, the fervor in his voice undiminished. "Not dangerous, Lachlan. Hopeful. There's ideas out there, ideas that could lift us from the mire." A murmur rippled through the nearby workers, a blend of curiosity and trepidation. Murdo, an older laborer with hands gnarled like the roots of an ancient oak, chimed in. "And what, when Cray hears of it? You think he'll let us chase these fancies without consequence?" Mary, who had joined the gathering, her gentle features set in a mask of concern, added, "Ian's talking of change, of a world where the likes of us have a say in our fate." The group was a patchwork of those daring to hope and those too worn by life's hardships to entertain such notions. Their voices, a tapestry of dialects and timbres, filled the air with the electric charge of impending change. As the day wore on, Ian's words took root in the fertile soil of discontent. In hushed tones over shared ale, during stolen moments of respite, the ideas of freedom and fair commerce sparked debates and dreams alike. Yet, fear shadowed their conversations, a specter lurking in the pauses between their words. The repercussions of dissent were not lost on them. The specter of Cray's retribution hung over their heads like the sword of Damocles. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows through the factory windows, Ian stood once more with Hamish, their figures etched against the backdrop of industry's relentless march. "They're scared, Hamish. Scared of what's new, of what's different." Hamish, his eyes reflecting the dying light, nodded. "Aye, they're scared. But scared men are the ones who've got something to lose. You've lit a spark, Ian. Now we've just to fan it into a flame." The dawn of disturbance was not just the sun's ascent over the horizon, it was the awakening of a collective consciousness among the mill workers. Ian, with the heart of an underdog but the spirit of a leader, had sown the seeds of change. Now, he and his peers stood on the precipice of a new day, one where the invisible chains of their station began to loosen, one whispered word at a time. Chapter 5. An Audience with Reason. In the dusky gloom of early evening, as the last whispers of day surrendered to night, Ian could feel the thrum of anticipation that coursed through the village. Beneath the lengthening shadows, he moved with quiet purpose, the cobblestone streets a familiar mosaic beneath his boots. In the dimly lit recesses of the Thirsty Thistle, where the scent of hops and barley lingered like an old friend, Ian found his comrades gathered, their faces etched with a blend of excitement and trepidation. "Are we all here?" Ian asked, his voice low, eyes flickering to the entrance where the door creaked a soft symphony of sullen wood. "Aye, we're all accounted for," murmured Finlay, his pipe unlit and forgotten in his hand. His keen eyes, usually narrowed in mirth or mischief, now held a glint of solemnity. Ian scanned the room, noting the huddled forms of Elspeth, Hamish, Lachlan, and others who had come to symbolize the silent backbone of the mill. Their hands, still stained with the day's labor, rested uneasily on the worn tables. "We've gathered here in the shroud of night to speak of matters that may well alter the course of our lives," Ian began, his voice steady despite the fluttering in his chest. "Smith's words have kindled a fire in me, one that I reckon burns in each of ye." Murmurs of assent rippled through the group, like the first drops of rain upon a parched earth. Murdo, his furrowed brow belying his age, leaned forward. "Ye talk of markets and freedom, Ian, but will those grand notions fill our bellies or mend our wounds?" Elspeth, her hands folded before her, nodded toward Ian. "A fair query, Murdo. But what if Ian's right? What if there's a life where our sweat earns us more than just a cot and a crust?" Ian met her gaze, grateful for her tentative support. "Aye, we toil and spin, but for whose benefit? Cray lines his coffers while we count our coppers. Should we not strive for a fair shake in this world?" Davy, the young lad with a heart as wide as the Clyde, spoke up, his voice cracking with youthful fervor. "I've heard the talk, Ian, about how trade and industry could be ours to command, not just the playthings of the gentry." Lachlan shifted, his expression a tapestry of doubt and fear. "It's all well and good to dream, but what of Craddock and his ilk? They've ears everywhere." Ian's stance was resolute, his blue eyes sparking in the tavern's wan light. "Then we'll speak in whispers and act in unity. We'll educate ourselves, learn the workings of this free market, and take the reins of our fate." A hush fell upon the assembly, the gravity of their endeavor hanging in the air like the dense fog that rolled in from the loch. It was Mary, her voice usually as gentle as a summer's breeze, who broke the silence. "We stand at the dawn of a new day," she said, her conviction rising like the swell of the sea. "Let us be the masters of this day, for our children and their children after." And so the clandestine meeting became an audience with reason, where the seeds of change were sown in the fertile minds of the weary. They hatched plans, sketched dreams, and forged a collective will to challenge the rigid confines of their existence. As they dispersed into the cloak of night, each heart carried a fragment of the rebellion, a spark that promised to ignite the kindling of their collective discontent. This gathering, secreted away in the heart of the Thirsty Thistle, was but the first of many, the catalyst in the narrative of the underdog whose time had come to rise. Chapter 6. The Echo of Inquiry. In the dim light of dawn, the village of Dunedin roused to the familiar symphony of labor the distant bleating of sheep, the creaking of carts, and the steady rhythm of the mill awakening. But beneath this morning's mundane mantle, a A tremor of tension rippled through the lanes and alleys, whispers of the night's clandestine congregation echoing against the cobblestones. Ian, with the weight of leadership now draped upon his shoulders like a mantle he never sought, strode with a careful determination through the awakening streets. His sandy brown hair, slightly disheveled from the restless night, caught the first glimmers of sunlight as he approached the thirsty thistle, now silent in the daybreak. "Mornin', Ian," greeted Hamish, his voice a low rumble as they met at the crossroads. "Word has it that ye stirred the pot well and good last night." "Aye, that we did," Ian replied, his blue eyes scanning the thoroughfare for eavesdroppers. "But we must tread carefully, for walls have ears, and some may be well lined with Cray's silver." Hamish's robust form tensed, his eyes reflecting a sudden spark of concern. "Ye think we've been ratted out, then?" Before Ian could reply, the air was cut by the sharp approach of footsteps. Murdo emerged from the shadow of an alley, his aged face etched with worry. "We might have a bigger problem, lads. There's talk at the mill that Cray's got wind of something brewing." Ian's heart sank like a stone in the lock. Talk? What sort of talk? His fingers curled into a fist, the small gear he often fiddled with pressing into his palm. "Afore I left, I heard Craddock whispering to one of the overseers. They're looking for a stirrer, someone causing unrest," Murdo explained, his voice a grating whisper barely audible over the morning bustle. Elspeth, joining the huddled group, interjected with a hiss. "A spy, then? Among us?" Ian locked eyes with her, the gravity of the situation pulling at the corners of his resolve. "It seems we must find the leak, for it sinks our ship." Davy, the young lad with a fire in his belly for change, approached with a furtive glance. "You reckon one of our own would turn coat? For what? A few extra pence?" Lachlan, his usually jovial face now drawn tight, added, "Fear's a powerful thing, Davy. Fear of the noose or the stocks can turn a man's heart colder than a midwinter's night." The group fell into an uneasy silence, the reality of their predicament settling upon them like the thick fog that often rolled in from the sea, obscuring paths and hiding predators. Ian broke the silence with a decisive tone. "We'll not be cowed by Cray or his lackeys. We must continue to meet, to share the word of Smith and the vision of a fairer future. But we do so with eyes wide open, watchful for the serpent in our garden." Hamish nodded, his burly hand coming to rest on Ian's shoulder. "We're with ye, Ian, to the end of this, wherever it may lead." As the mill's siren called them to their day's labor, the group dispersed, each member acutely aware of the invisible noose that now seemed to tighten around their collective neck. They entered the mill, the echo of their boots on the wooden planks a staccato march, while the looms awaited their daily dance with destiny. Inside the stone-clad belly of the beast, the workers glanced at one another with a new wariness, a shared question in their eyes. Who among them could be the echo of inquiry that threatened to unravel their tapestry of rebellion? In the heart of Dunedin, the underdog's fight for freedom had met its first true test, an adversary cloaked in the guise of a friend. And in that moment of doubt, the seeds of mistrust threatened to choke the fragile bloom of hope they had so tenderly nurtured. Chapter 7. Threads of Knowledge. Ian's world had become a tapestry of clandestine study and toil, the mill's incessant hum a stark contrast to the hushed conversations that now filled his nights. As the moon ascended the throne of the heavens, casting its silvery glow upon Dunedin, Ian would huddle within the cloistered confines of his modest chamber, poring over smuggled texts and treatises that he had bartered for with his meager savings. The flickering candlelight cast elongated shadows on the walls of his room, as Ian's fingers traced the intricate sentences of Adam Smith's treatise. His furrowed brow and the soft muttering of words betrayed the effort of comprehension, the struggle to grasp the complexities of an economist's vision. Elspeth, whose keen intellect matched the fire of her hair, had become a steadfast ally in these nocturnal pursuits. "Ye truly think these ideas can change the world, Ian?" She queried one evening, her skepticism softened by the earnestness in Ian's gaze. "Aye, Elspeth, I do," Ian affirmed, his voice unwavering. "The wealth of a nation is more than gold and silver. It's the sum of its people's labors, their inventions, and the freedom to trade as they see fit." Elspeth nodded, the weight of Ian's words settling in her mind. And yet we're bound by Lord Cray's edicts, as if our hands are tied with the very threads we weave. On occasion, Ian's quest for knowledge led him to the home of Mr. Douglas, a scholar of some repute who had taken a liking to the industrious mill worker. Douglas's study was a bastion of learning, with shelves lined with volumes that held secrets of philosophy, history, and economics. Remember, Ian, Douglas would advise, his voice the texture of worn leather, knowledge is a weapon sharper than any blade forged in steel. Ian soaked in every lesson, every discussion, his mind as ravenous as a loom for cotton. But how can I wield this weapon when the mill consumes every waking hour? He often lamented. Douglas regarded Ian with a measured look. Balance, my boy. As the market finds equilibrium with supply and demand, so must you balance the demands of body and mind. The challenge of this equilibrium was ever present, as the mill's grueling pace left Ian spent and hollow-eyed. Yet, night after night, he returned to his studies, his spirit fueled by the promise of emancipation, not just for himself, but for all who toiled beneath the yoke of tyranny. Myri, who observed her brother's relentless pursuit with a mixture of pride and concern, would sometimes sit quietly beside him, stitching cloth as he stitched together his understanding of a world beyond the mill. "You need your rest, Ian," she would chide gently. Ian would smile, a weary but determined curve of the lips. "Rest will come, Mary, when we've earned the right to it, when our labor is our own to govern." As the days bled into weeks, the undercurrents of unrest at the mill were matched only by the undercurrents of Ian's burgeoning intellect. He became a conduit of knowledge, sharing Smith's insights in hushed tones with those who dared to listen, weaving threads of enlightenment into the very fabric of the worker's existence. In the training of his mind, Ian found a new strength, the preparation for a confrontation that loomed inevitable. Threads of Knowledge was not merely the title of his story. It was the lifeline that he clung to, a beacon that guided him through the oppressive darkness of ignorance and towards the dawn of understanding. And so, as the looms wove their endless patterns, Ian wove his own design, a pattern of thought and theory that promised to unravel the bindings of servitude and reweave the fabric of their lives into a tapestry of liberty and prosperity. Chapter 8. Small Victories. With the mill's gears grinding tirelessly in the background and the scent of oiled machinery and raw wool permeating the air, Ian found himself deep in whispered conference with Elspeth. The mill's din provided a veil of sound beneath which they could plot their modest insurrection. "You've seen the numbers, Elspeth," Ian said, his fingers stained with ink from the ledgers he had been studying. "If we band together, purchase our grindstones and thread in bulk, sharing the cost, we'd all be saving coin." Elspeth's lips curled into a cautious smile, her mind quick to grasp the implications of the scheme. A cooperative, then? It's a bold move. But what when Cray catches wind of it? Ian's eyes sparkled with determination, the blue of them almost incandescent in the gloom of the mill. "Aye, but it's our right, is it not? To pool our resources for the good of all?" In the dim corner of the mill where the daylight scarcely intruded, Lachlan overheard and ambled over, his curiosity piqued. "Are ye talking about putting Smith's words into action, then?" "That we are," Ian confirmed, nodding to the ledger. "It's small, but it's a start." The trio huddled closer, their heads bowed over the figures that Ian had scrawled across the pages. Murmurs of agreement and the occasional clink of coin passed from hand to hand as the workers began to contribute to their fledgling fund. As the days passed, their cooperative purchasing program bore fruit. New grindstones arrived, sharper and more durable than the ones provided by Cray's chosen suppliers. Skeins of wool thread of a finer quality than they were accustomed to began to fill their baskets. The changes did not go unnoticed. The quality of the cloth improved, and the laborers saw fewer frays and breaks, easing the relentless toil of their days. Hamish, beaming with pride at their collective ingenuity, clapped Ian on the back one afternoon as they inspected a bolt of finished fabric. "Look at that weave, Ian. Tight and even, like the best of the Edinburgh weavers." Ian allowed himself a moment of pride, but his joy was tempered by the knowledge that their victory was a fragile thing. "We mustn't let our guard down, Hamish. Cray will not take kindly to us sidestepping his authority." The inevitable confrontation came one cold morning when Cray's shadow darkened the threshold of the mill, his presence as chilling as the draft that followed in his wake. "What is this I hear of a workers' consortium?" Cray's voice was a blade drawn across the stone of silence. "You overstep your bounds." Ian stepped forward, the eyes of his fellow laborers upon him. "My lord, we merely sought to improve our efficiency. Better tools for better products." Cray's gaze was icy, his lips a thin line of disdain. "You will cease this folly at once. I will not have my workers undermining my contracts." Mary, who had joined the ranks of the consortium with a quiet determination, spoke up with a courage that belied her slight frame. "We meant no offense, sir. The proof of our intent is in the cloth finer than before." For a moment, Cray surveyed the bolts of fabric that lined the walls of the mill, his expression unreadable. Finally, he snorted, a dismissive sound that filled the cavernous space. "See that you remember your place. I will not tolerate such endeavors again." As Cray's footsteps receded, the workers exchanged glances. Ian's chest was tight with the conflict of their small victory shadowed by Cray's thinly veiled threat. "You've started something," Elspeth murmured, her eyes alight with a mix of fear and admiration. "Small victories lead to larger battles." Ian nodded, his mind already turning over their next move. "Aye, and we'll be ready. This is but the dawn of our struggle." In the heart of the mill, where the looms clattered and the workers bent once more to their labor, the threads of knowledge that Ian had spun were woven into the very fabric of their rebellion. Small victories, like threads, would come together to form the stronger rope of their collective aspirations. And in the training and preparation of their underdog spirit, they found the strength to face the looming battles ahead. Chapter 9. A Crack in the Loom. The morning air within the mill was thick with apprehension, a palpable cloud that seemed to lower the ceiling and tighten the walls around Ian and his fellow laborers. The machines hissed and clacked in discordant chorus, a harsh reminder of the tension that now threaded through the workforce. Ian, his hands working rhythmically amidst the loom's weft and warp, felt the weight of scrutiny from both his peers and the overseers. The cooperative's success had sown a mix of inspiration and fear, and whispers traveled the floor like shuttles through the textile. "You've got the gall of a Highlander facing down the redcoats," Murdo grumbled as he sidled up to Ian. His eyes darted nervously toward the overseer's perch. "But gall won't shield ye from Cray's wrath." Ian's jaw set firmly as he replied, "We're not in the wrong, Murdo. Change is a-comin', whether Cray likes it or no." Elspeth, her fingers dancing deftly over her loom with the practiced ease born of years, leaned in, her voice barely above the whirring din. "Some are scared, Ian. They fear what Cray might do if he sees us stepping out of line." "And rightly so," interjected Davy, his youthful face shadowed by the growing uncertainty. "I heard talk of cutting hours for those too vocal. We've families to feed." Ian's resolve flickered like the candle flame that had illuminated his late-night vigils. The specter of retaliation hung over them, a cloud darker than the soot-stained walls of the mill. As the day wore on, the tension crescendoed with the arrival of Cray himself, flanked by overseers who looked more like wardens than mill hands. Their eyes scanned the workers, lingering on Ian with a cold, calculating gaze. Cray's voice cut through the noise, imperious and cold. "McAllister!" "Step forward." Ian complied, his back straight, his steps measured. The room hushed, the loom's relentless rhythm falling away as all eyes turned to witness the unfolding drama. "You've become a thorn in my side," Cray began, his tone biting as the winter chill. "Your ideas upset the order of things. You forget your place." Ian met Cray's gaze, his voice steady. "My lord, my only aim was to better our work, to improve the yield for us all." "Aye, and upset my agreements and tarnish my authority," Cray snapped back. "You will no longer work the looms. You are demoted to the carding room, effective immediately." A collective gasp rose from the assembly. The carding room was a dusty purgatory, the lowest rung in the mill's hierarchy, where the air was choked with fibers and the work tedious and unending. Elspeth's face blanched as she watched Ian's stoic acceptance of the punishment. "This isn't just Cray. Ian's done naught but good for the mill." Cray turned his ire on her. "Your loyalty to McAllister is misplaced, Elspeth. Be mindful lest you share his fate." As Cray and his entourage retreated, leaving a wake of dread behind them, Ian felt the heavy hand of defeat press upon his shoulders. The carding room was a place of exile, a message to all who dared dream of change. Hamish, his broad face a mask of anger and sorrow, clutched Ian's arm. "This isn't the end, Ian. We won, let it be." Mary approached, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "What will ye do now, brother?" Ian looked around at the sea of faces, some averted, some filled with sympathy, others with fear. "We face this setback as we've faced all others, together. This is but one thread frayed, not the whole tapestry unraveled." The mill continued its incessant churning, the looms oblivious to the human drama that had unfolded within their midst. Ian, though cast from his place among the weavers, carried within him the unbreakable thread of hope and the knowledge that from the greatest trials are woven the strongest victories. As he descended into the bowels of the mill, the carding room awaited him with its monotonous drudgery. Yet, in the challenges and setbacks of the underdog's journey, Ian found a renewed determination to mend the crack in the loom and weave anew the fabric of their destiny. Chapter 10. In the Shadows of Giants. In the dimly lit carding room, where the incessant clatter of the looms was replaced by the dusty hush of fibers being combed and straightened, Ian sat, solitary, on a rickety stool. The flickering light from the sputtering lanterns cast long, dancing shadows across his features, deepening the lines of doubt etched into his weary face. He glanced at his hands, once calloused from the loom, now coated with the fine fluff of wool, each filament a tiny, taunting reminder of his fall from grace. His thoughts, like the errant threads that surrounded him, were tangled with uncertainty and fear. "Ian, you look like a ghost, lad," Murdo said, emerging from the veil of floating dust particles that filled the air like a persistent fog. "You've not given up the fight, have ye?" Ian shook his head, his lips pressing into a thin line. "I've not given up, but at what cost, Murdo? Our comrades suffer, and for what? A dream?" Murdo drew closer, his voice a gravelly comfort. "You've sparked something in us all, Ian. It's more than a dream, it's a chance at a life worth living." Ian's gaze drifted to the looming carding machines, their wooden frames creaking with age and use. "Sometimes the shadow of a giant seems too vast to escape," he murmured, a metaphor for the mill owner's pervasive influence. From the shadows, Elspeth approached, her presence a beacon in the dim room. "A giant may be tall, Ian, but it takes only a small stone to topple him, if aimed true." Ian looked up at her, a faint smile touching his lips. "And are we armed with such stones?" "Aye, in our unity and resolve," she replied, her eyes fierce with conviction. "You've taught us that much." The carding room seemed to hold its breath, the dust motes hanging suspended in the air as if waiting for Ian's reply. He stood, his stature rising along with his spirits. "Then we'll continue to cast those stones together." Davy, who had been quietly working nearby, chimed in, his tone an odd mixture of hesitance and hope. "The others are starting to whisper, Ian. They miss your voice on the floor. They're asking when you'll speak again." Ian's eyes met Davy's, and he saw reflected in them the fears and aspirations of all who toiled beneath Lord Cray's rule. "Tell them I'll speak soon, and when I do, it'll be with a voice fortified by their strength." Mary slipped into their circle, her hands still nimble from her work at the loom. "You've carried us this far, brother. We'll not let ye bear this burden alone." The carding room, with its looming machines and oppressive atmosphere, was suddenly alight with the glow of shared purpose. The workers, once isolated by their tasks, now stood together, their whispers coalescing into a chorus of quiet rebellion. As Ian gathered with his fellow laborers, the giants they faced the mill, Lord Cray, the very foundations of their society, seemed less fearsome in the company of allies. The carding room, once a place of exile, became a crucible where their resolve was forged anew. In the Shadows of Giants was not just a tale of one man's struggle, but of a collective awakening. And as Ian contemplated the path ahead, buoyed by the support of his peers, he knew that though the journey was fraught with hardship, the destination, a life of dignity and freedom, was worth every step. Chapter 11. Labor's Loud Cry. Dawn barely broke over the skyline of Dunedin, the pallid light creeping reluctantly through the crowded millworkers' cottages as a murmured discontent began to swell into a roar. Huddled masses, once scattered and solitary in their toil, now stood shoulder to shoulder, their breaths visible in the crisp morning air, eyes alight with the flames of resolve. Ian, standing on an improvised platform, a stack of stout wooden crates outside time, The thirsty thistle addressed the gathered throng. His voice carried the timbre of one who speaks not just with words, but with the weight of shared plight and promise. This day we demand what's fair, what's due for the sweat we pour into every bolt and weave. Ian called out, his calloused hands gesturing to the assemblage of determined faces. Elspeth, standing at the front of the crowd, her red hair a vivid flame against the drab hues of woolen shawls and caps, lifted her chin defiantly. No more will we bend like reeds to the wind of Cray's whims. We stand firm, for fair wages and for our dignity. Their cry was taken up, echoed by a multitude of voices, a clamor that filled the streets and rattled the windows of the overseer's quarters. In the distance the mill loomed, a silent giant awaiting the oncoming storm. Lord Cray, from his manor high on the hill, watched the scene unfold with a mix of disdain and concern. He had not anticipated this unity, this defiance. He had underestimated the quiet mill worker who now led the charge against him. Hamish, whose broad shoulders had borne the weight of countless bales, joined Ian, his voice booming as he addressed the crowd. "We've naught but our chains to lose, friends. It's time Cray hears the labor's loud cry." The gates of the mill stood closed, a barrier of iron and wood, but the true barricade was the line of constables summoned to halt the workers' advance. Their truncheons glinted ominously in the pale light, a stark reminder of the resistance they faced. Ian stepped down from his platform, his stride purposeful as he approached the line of lawmen. "We seek no quarrel with ye," he stated, his tone earnest. "We seek only justice, a fair day's wage for a fair day's work." A constable, his face obscured by the brim of his helmet, shifted uneasily. "It's not our place, McAllister. Take your grievances to Cray." And so Ian passed through the gates, the eyes of his comrades upon him, carrying their hopes as a standard into the belly of the beast. Within the cold stone walls of the mill office, Cray awaited, his expression a mask of aristocratic control. "McAllister," he greeted icily, "you've overstepped. The consequences will be severe." Ian stood firm, the very image of the underdog facing the might of uncaring power. "The only consequence I fear is a life spent in servitude without hope of betterment. We ask for what is just no more, no less." Cray's fingers drummed upon the surface of his mahogany desk, the sound a staccato counterpoint to the distant chants of the strikers. "You will dismantle this farce, or you will suffer the full extent of my reach." Ian's gaze did not waver. "It's no farce, my lord. It's the voice of every man and woman who's given their all to this mill. Will you listen, or will you turn a deaf ear and prove you hold no regard for those upon whose backs your fortune is built?" The standoff was palpable, the air between the men charged with the electricity of impending consequence. Outside, the workers' chant grew louder, a relentless surge of sound that could no longer be ignored. With a heavy sigh, as if the weight of his own pride was a burden too great to bear, Cray relented, his voice begrudging. "Speak your terms, McAllister. Let us end this disruption." And so it was, in the shadows of giants, that the underdog found his footing. As Ian negotiated for the rights of his fellow laborers, he did so with the conviction of one who has known hardship and the unyielding belief in the power of unity. The mill's siren, silent for the first time in memory, stood as a testament to the moment when the course of many lives shifted, guided by the courage of one who dared to speak when the world demanded silence. Chapter 12. Breaking the Mold. The grand oaken doors of the mill office closed with a solid, resonant thud behind Ian as he departed from the final round of negotiations. His heart hammered against his ribs, not with trepidation but with the burgeoning triumph of their collective will. As he descended the steps, the solid stone beneath his boots felt less like the cold, unyielding path of a laborer, and more like the triumphant march of a man who had dared to stand eye to eye with power and not blink. He found Elspeth waiting for him at the foot of the steps, her hands clasped together tightly, a testament to the anxious energy that filled the air. "Well," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, yet charged with the intensity of a storm's approach. Ian's lips curled into a weary but satisfied smile. "We've done it, Elspeth." Cray's agreed to raise wages, shorten the workday. It's a start a crack in the mold. Around them, the assembled workers, a sea of linen caps and woolen shawls, erupted into a cacophony of cheers and shouts, the sound rising like a wave crashing against the shore. Hamish's face split into a grin that stretched from ear to ear. "You've led us well, Ian. Fought the good fight and won us a future." Yet within the celebratory throng, Murdo's countenance remained a mask of caution, his eyes scanning the windows of the mill where the overseers watched, their expressions unreadable. "Aye, it's a victory," he conceded, "but keep your wits about ye. The mill's old ways won't break easy." Ian nodded, acknowledging the wisdom in Murdo's words. "We'll hold Cray to his word, and we'll stand ready should he renege." The workers began to disperse, each to their own homes, where the news of their nascent victory would be shared over hearths and at dinner tables. Ian watched them go, feeling the gravity of leadership settle upon him anew. In the days that followed, changes took root within the mill. The laborers' hours were shortened, their pay, while not bounteous, was improved, and the specter of perpetual exhaustion began to lift, if only slightly. Mary, with a new brightness in her eyes, approached her brother during a rare moment of respite. "You've given them hope, Ian," she said, her voice tinged with both pride and worry. "But what of the backlash?" Ian, his gaze lingering on the workers who now held their heads a bit higher, replied, "We'll face it together, as we've faced all things. We're no longer the clay to be shaped at whim. We're breaking the mold, Mary." As the mill gears turned with a less oppressive grind, and the looms clattered with a rhythm that no longer sounded like a dirge, the workers whispered amongst themselves of the future, of possibilities once thought beyond reach. Yet, in the shadowed corners, where the light of change had yet to fully penetrate, the overseers whispered too, their words laced with resentment and plans of their own. The old guard was not yet ready to relinquish its grip, and the mold, though cracked, was not yet shattered. Ian knew this, knew that the path ahead was fraught with peril, a tightrope walk between the dawn of progress and the dusk of reprisal. But as he regarded his fellow laborers, their faces alight with the glow of hard-won success, he felt the stirrings of a new era. In this chapter of their lives, breaking the mold was not just a phrase, but a reality, a testament to the power of the human spirit to rise, to challenge, to transform. And in the heart of the underdog, the drive to push onward, to fight for every inch of ground gained, burned brighter than ever. Chapter 13. The Unforeseen Path. Within the humble confines of the local parish hall, a place where stone walls reverberated with the echoes of community gatherings and Sunday sermons, Ian now found himself at the epicenter of a different sort of congregation. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax from the candles burning in sconces and an undercurrent of anticipation that buzzed through the crowd. "Ian, you've become quite the beacon for us all," Murdo said, easing up beside him. "It's no small thing, steering this ship." Aye, the mantle of leadership was an unfamiliar garment, scratchy and ill-fitting, yet Ian wore it with a growing sense of purpose. "I only hope to be worthy of the task," Ian replied, his eyes scanning the room filled with faces that looked to him for guidance. Elspeth maneuvered through the throng to join them, her presence always a source of strength for Ian. "You know, they're speaking your name beyond Dunedin now." "Ian McAllister, the mill workers' champion," she said, a teasing lilt to her voice that belied the gravity of her words. Ian exhaled, the breath of visible mist in the chill of the hall. "Champion is a title for knights and bards, Elspeth. I'm just a man who couldn't abide by the injustice no more." The room began to settle, wooden chairs scraping against the floor as Ian was beckoned to the front. Stepping onto the humble dais, he faced the expectant crowd. "Friends, neighbors," he began, his voice steady though his hands betrayed a tremor of nerves. "Our journey's been one of toil and triumph alike, but we've forged a path that leads toward a fairer horizon." Davy, his youthful countenance bright with admiration, called out from the crowd, "You've shown us what's possible, Ian. What's next for us?" Ian locked eyes with the lad, feeling the weight of the question. "We continue to press forward, to mold this progress into lasting change. It's not just about the mill, it's about how we, as a people, want to shape our future." The room erupted in affirmations, a chorus of agreement that bolstered Ian's spirits. Yet, as the meeting progressed, the discussions turned to the practicalities of their new world, the distribution of wages, the management of work hours, and the education of their children. Mary found her way to the front, her voice cutting through the discourse with clarity and resolve. What of the children, Ian? Will we see them educated, that they might not face the same struggles? Ian nodded, a swell of pride for his sister's insight. Education is key. We'll work with the local schoolmaster, ensure our young ones learn more than just the loom. As the evening waned and the candle flames guttered low, Ian remained, fielding questions and concerns from his community. This role of advocate, of mediator, was one he had never envisioned, yet he embraced it with a sense of duty that transcended his own aspirations. Hamish, waiting as the hall emptied, clapped Ian on the back. "You're a natural, Ian. This movement, it's become something much larger than any of us." "Aye," Ian sighed, the corners of his mouth lifting in a tired smile. "It's a path unseen, stretching out before us. We walk it together, come what may." As the parish hall doors closed behind them, the night embracing them in its quiet hush, Ian gazed up at the stars that dusted the velvet sky. In their light, he saw the reflection of the many eyes that now looked to him for leadership, the many souls that now counted on his voice. The unforeseen path was not just the trajectory of Ian's life, it had become the journey of an entire community. And as the underdog assumed his role as their chosen helmsman, the road ahead promised new vistas, new challenges, and the unwavering hope of the dawn that follows the darkest night. Chapter 14. Harmony of Interests. Ian leaned against the sturdy frame of the mill's freshly painted entrance, the vibrant green door a stark contrast to the worn stones that had witnessed decades of ceaseless toil. The mill's wheels turned with a rhythmic pulse that now spoke of cooperation rather than coercion. Workers passed by with nods and smiles, a shared camaraderie born from recent triumphs and the promise of a fairer future. "You've made quite the impact, Ian," Douglas noted, approaching the mill with an air of casual erudition, the silver at his temples catching the morning light. "It's a new chapter for Dunedin." "Aye, that it is." Ian's eyes followed a group of children on their way to the newly established schoolhouse. And it's more than just the mill, it's the whole community coming together. Inside the bustling mill, Elspeth adjusted the settings on her loom with a familiarity that spoke of her years of expertise. She caught Ian's eye and gestured to the loom's improved mechanisms. "Would you believe it? These new parts from Glasgow are a marvel. Less breakage, less waste." Ian chuckled, watching the loom's shuttles glide with improved efficiency. "Progress doesn't always come knocking with a cudgel, then?" A voice, rich with the gravitas of experience, interjected. "Not always, but often enough that we ken its sound." Murdo, his hands folded behind his back, regarded the machines with a mix of respect and caution. Hamish joined the conversation, his laughter booming above the clatter. "Well, we've managed to temper progress with a bit o' common sense, thanks to our Ian here." Mary, her apron dusted with flour from her recent foray into the bakery trade, smiled at her brother. "You've brought us a long way, but the road stretches on still." Ian nodded, the light from the high windows casting patterns on the mill floor, weaving light with shadow. "True enough. The balance twixt new ways and old is a delicate dance." A new voice entered the fray, one that held the crisp enunciation of authority, yet softened by recent humility. "McAllister, I must admit, your ideas have merit." Lord Cray stood at the threshold, his silhouette less imposing than in days past. Ian faced him, an eyebrow raised in mild surprise. "My lord, to what do we owe the pleasure?" Cray's lips twitched in a reluctant smile. "I've come to see the fruits of this harmony of interests you've cultivated." As they walked through the mill, past workers who glanced up with a mixture of curiosity and newfound respect, Cray observed the changes, the safety measures, the communal boards listing shifts and wages, and the suggestions box brimming with ideas. "It's a different world from the one I knew," Cray mused, more to himself than to Ian, but perhaps not an entirely unwelcome one. Elspeth, pausing in her work, gave Cray a measured look. "You'll find, my lord, that when interests align, the world's not such a harsh place." Cray nodded, the motion stirring the air of change that permeated the mill. He turned to leave, pausing at the door to offer Ian a curt nod, an acknowledgement of the new era they had all entered. As the day waned and the mill's workers filed out into the amber glow of dusk, Ian lingered, watching the interplay of light and shadow, progress and tradition, harmony and discord. "It's a finer weave we're creating," Ian said, half to himself and half to the spirits of the mill who whispered in the settling dust. one that holds together through the strongest pulls and strains. In the aftermath, where the underdog's story found its denouement, the community of Dunedin moved forward, not as separate threads, but as a fabric, strengthened by the weave of shared purpose and the enduring pattern of hope. Chapter 15, The Wealth of a Nation's Soul. In the golden light of the setting sun, the mills of Dunedin stood resilient against the backdrop of a changing world. The structures, once imposing symbols of relentless toil, now harmonized with the vibrant pulse of a community in bloom. The air, once thick with the grime of industry, now carried the sounds of labor infused with dignity and the laughter of children released from the yoke of premature work. Ian, with the wisdom of experience etched softly into the lines of his face, leaned upon the fence that bordered the village green. He watched the youngsters at play, their energy a testament to the hope that now thrived in the heart of the town. Douglas approached, a thoughtful expression upon his scholarly countenance. "You've woven quite the tapestry, Ian. The threads of Smith's vision are clear in the fabric of our daily lives." With a nod, Ian's eyes remained on the children. "It's their future we've been fighting for, Douglas. A life where the wealth of a nation is measured not just in ledgers, but in the strength of its community." Elspeth joined them, her stride confident, a reflection of the respect she had garnered as a leader in her own right. "The mill's been a good place of late. Fair wages, reasonable hours. It's as if the very bricks and mortar have absorbed the spirit of our endeavors." Ian turned to her, the corners of his eyes crinkling in a smile. "And what of the workers, Elspeth? Do they grasp the breadth of what they've achieved?" "Aye, they do," she replied, pride resonating in her voice. "They speak of Adam Smith in the tavern as if he were a local. His ideas of free markets and moral sentiments have taken root." Murdo ambled up, his gait steady and slow, a living testament to the toils and triumphs of their journey. "The mill owner, Cray, he's been seen walking the floor, talking to the workers. Would ye have believed it?" Ian chuckled softly. "Belief was all we had at times, Murdo, but seeing it with me own eyes, that's the reward of our struggle." As the twilight deepened, casting a soft glow across the faces of the villagers, Mary emerged from the bakery, her hands floured, but her expression content. "Ian, ye should hear the talk. They're planning a market day, vendors from all over, trading goods and ideas alike." Ian's gaze swept across the familiar faces of his village, a tapestry of individuals who had each played a part in the grand design of change. "A market day here?" he mused. "That's the very essence of wealth, merry people coming together, each with something to offer." Hamish's voice boomed from behind them. "And let's not forget the new looms on the way. Efficiency and fair practice hand in hand. We're setting the example for mills everywhere." The group fell silent for a moment, each lost in reflection. It was Ian who broke the stillness, his words carrying the gravity of their shared journey. "We've seen the dawn of a new era, where the wealth of a nation's soul is the true measure of progress. This is our legacy." As the final shades of daylight surrendered to the stars, Ian thought of the pages of The Wealth of Nations, the catalyst for so much. The principles they had drawn from Smith's work had proven to be more than economic theories. They were the blueprint for a society where every individual could aspire to something greater. In the quiet of the evening, with the past and future converging in the heart of Dunedin, the underdog's reflection was clear. The wealth of a nation lay not in its coffers, but in the spirit and aspirations of its people, in the harmony of their interests, and in the unyielding belief that every soul has value beyond measure.
Thank you for listening. Subscribe now and visit our website storywave.ai to start creating your own generative audiobooks today. Storywave is the only true on-demand entertainment portal.